Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here.
And I'm Chad Oban. You're invited to a special live recording of Plain Talk on Wednesday, February 19th at the Peacock Alley in beautiful downtown Bismarck.
We'll be interviewing special guests, reacting to the latest headlines, and answering questions from the audience.
Admission is free, so plan to arrive early to grab a great spot. The reporting kicks off at 6 p.m., and after the show, Rob and I will stick around if for some reason you want to meet us.
That's Wednesday, February 19th at Peacock Alley in Bismarck, starting at 6 p.m.
We'll see you there.
The work done by the thousands of North Dakota oil and natural gas workers is working to improve energy independence and national security. Working to make America more competitive around the world. And working to provide a better today and tomorrow for everyone in North Dakota and across our country. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas works for our future. North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, advancing the possibilities.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where we are once again talking about property taxes because it's our favorite subject. We love it so much. It's so exciting. It's great for ratings. Everybody loves property taxes, right? In actual reality, everybody's mad about property taxes. I'm pretty sure most people would like to stop talking about property taxes, but we've got to find a way to get a property tax regime that we can live with. And so far, obviously we have the Governor Kelly Armstrong's plan on the table. We just spoke with Representative Ben Koppelman, Republican from West Fargo. We talked about his plan. That's on the table. The other big one, and I mean, listen, there's dozens and dozens of property taxes that are varying levels of reform and change. But these are kind of the big three in my perception. Chad, I don't know if you feel that way.
There's a Weiss property tax measure that's out there. There's a Mathern one that's sort of the Democrat plan, but I think that's one of the things we need to go into. Yeah, I mean, I think there's 5 probably big plans, and how do we work our way through that? So
right.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, this is one of the 3. The legislation is House Bill 1168. The sponsor is State Representative Scott Louser. He's a Republican from Minot. And Scott, I'm just going to pitch it to you. What is your approach? What does this plan do?
Well, I'll go back in history. At the end of last session, there was a controversy between the House and the Senate on publicly funding private education. I got up on the floor and opposed it twice. The governor vetoed it. The House failed to override that veto. And I said on the floor at the end of session, I'll have a plan that I'm going to come forward with. But the House at that time never really got an opportunity to debate property tax. And we had this education idea. So over the interim in the summer, so I'm talking June of 2023, I put a bill draft or an idea together that included some language for funding private education with tax dollars, but it primarily focused on property tax at about the same time. In fact, within the same week that the petition language was approved for circulation to eliminate property tax. They were 7 days apart. And so what we have now is a property tax bill without any language regarding private school funding. There's 2 elements to it. It has a 60 mil buyout for, as it currently is written, the 60 mil buyout for the K-12 mills that are mandated by the legislature under property tax for residential property, and a 3% cap on the portion of local political subdivisions budgets that are derived from property taxes. So those are the 2 elements. There's a lot of details on both sides, but a 60 mil buyout on residential property, which is going to be about $300 million estimated, and a 3% cap on the portion of the budgets outside of school districts, on the portion of budgets in the county, the city, the park board that are derived from property tax, 3% cap. And then from there.
One point of clarification, you said 60 mil buyout on residential property, but I'm assuming, does that include like rentals or is that just like primary residence?
Okay, so that's where my concern in the debate is on the discussion that we're having in the legislature on primary residence. I'm going to tell you this from a real estate broker's standpoint. Residential property is a type of property. And in North Dakota, residential property is a triplex, a duplex, a single family home, a condo, a townhouse, or a mobile home. So that's residential. Primary residence is how an individual that owns a piece of residential property chooses to use their property. Primary residence is a use, not a type of property. We have commercial, ag, residential, centrally assessed. So it already exists in law in North Dakota. The residential property is defined. Primary residence is a use. And I think that's probably where we'll take the discussion today, because much of what we're seeing in the legislature is revolving around primary residence. And that is a use of a property, not a type.
So Scott, let me, I watched the hearings on the Armstrong plan and then also watched the hearing on your bill. I did think it was interesting. I mean, you were very clear that your goal is to get property tax reform and relief out to the citizens, that you're not necessarily just wedded to your plan. Whatever moves forward, you're going to be supportive of. So why not just let the Armstrong plan be the plan? My primary goal is to get something done so we don't need to see Measure 4 ever again. And I do worry about these 5 different, and let me also be clear, I support your 60 mil buy down over the primary residence, but I want something to get done and I don't want there to be fighting. So can you talk about sort of the strategy in your head about, if something needs to be done, there seems to be some political power behind the Armstrong plan. Why not just say, hey, that's the vehicle, let's let that one fly?
Okay, good question. Thank you for that. I find myself in a difficult position pointing the issues out that I see in the other plan. I have committed to the governor and to others that I will support the ultimate vehicle that we have, but this is the time to vet these issues. I'll tell you one concern I've got with we are creating a new type of property called primary residence. Now think about this as a vehicle purchase. You can purchase a vehicle and then we give you a tax incentive to make that purchase of the vehicle. And now the state government steps in and says, forget the tax incentive for purchasing the vehicle. We're going to give you the tax incentive for using the vehicle for certain things, such as driving to work. So if you think of it that way, we are creating a type of property out of a use. And one of the things I have a big concern with is this would require, and I see no other way out of this, it would require the property owner every year to certify that their property that they're living in is their primary residence. As that tax credit, as being proposed in the other bill, grows, and I hope it does, I hope we in perpetuity in future legislatures continue to grow that credit, if this is the vehicle we choose, to the point that the credit offsets the tax obligation of every homeowner in North Dakota. It might take us 20 years to get there, but let's say that happens. At some point when that credit goes from $1,500 to $2,000 to $3,000, and you have to certify every year, somebody is going to call me and somebody's going to call every legislator in every district and say, I forgot to make my application. I don't get the credit now. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say some legislators are going to forget to do it. And at what point will the state step in and say, well, okay, we're going to give a grace period? I have another concern with that bill, and that it places a 3% cap on the schools, the school districts. And so this is simple math. We are also mandating in that other bill, we're mandating the 60 mils I'm proposing to buy out, not buy down, because that's the max. 60 mils is what we mandate. If those 60 mils stay in place, a simple algebraic equation is your assessed value times the mils equals your property tax liability. If on the right side of that equation, the property tax liability can only increase to 3% and your assessment goes up 6%, and we mandate the 60 mills, the equation's off, which means we will not levy the 60 mills. The state of North Dakota will step in, as we've done over the last 12 years, and we re-enter what we just left in transition minimums. I understand West Fargo.
Scott, can you just put a finer point on that? The 60 mills, the state mandates in order to get the full per pupil payments, correct? I mean, the 60
yes,
mills has something to do with the amount of money that districts get from the state. So if you remove that, yes, okay.
Right. We take the formula, we deduct out the 60 mills that were collected locally out of the formula, and what's left is the per pupil payment that goes back to that district, in short. But if the state mandates the 60 mills, in the simple math equation, we say 3% cap on the total, 60 mills stays, and your assessment, and in my bill, by the way, when I said $300 million, that took a 6% depreciation of real estate on average across the state. I think that's fair. But let's say it's 5%. Let's say your property went up 5%, or you're in West Fargo and went up 12. A 12% increase on the assessment times 60 mills does not equal a 3% increase on your taxes. The mills have to be bought down or paid by the state. So there's an unintended built-in state expense to doing what is being proposed in the caps by placing the 3% cap on school districts. We can't do it. But we can do it, but we enter into transition minimums, which this session we finally got out of after 12 years of experimenting with this process.
So just to summarize, it sounds like your critiques of the governor's plan so far are you don't like that your argument is basically trying to enforce a primary residence designation is going to be difficult, and which I agree with, by the way. The more I think about that, it's going to be really hard to make sure that, I mean, I think about it, it's Scott, you put an issue on the statewide ballot concerning legislative residency, right? And we struggle with that all the time. In the last election cycle, we had some controversy over our residency laws as they exist now for things like elected office are very loose. So now we put thousands of dollars in the flux, and boy, I agree with you. That could be a bear. And then your other objection is basically the cap. You think the cap is going to be a problem for schools?
Yes, well, the schools already have a cap. They have two caps that are currently in place: a hard cap of 10 mills on top of the 60 for their general fund. There's a cap of an additional 12 mills discretionary if the school district or school board imposes it, for dedicated for certain things like special education and transportation, busing, that sort of thing. Of course, you can go to the voters and ask for levy authority for a bond, and then up to 20 mills for a building fund, and that would take a vote of the residents in that district. There are other issues that I have with the cap, with the tax credit, and I'm going to give you a real-time issue that's happening in real estate across the United States. It's happening in North Dakota. When the interest rates for a 30-year mortgage 5 years ago were 2.5% and 3%, there was a rush of activity. People bought property, and those that already own property refinanced. So you have a large portion of the market that has a really low interest rate right now. And here we are in an interest rate environment of, say, 7%. And we've got the entry level real estate market. Property owners are not putting their properties on the market to buy up and move into the next phase of their life for two reasons. When they move up, the house is more expensive and the interest rate has doubled on that new property. So people are holding on to keep their low interest rate. And that is confining the real estate market, the entry-level market, for people to get out of rentals and into homes. If we do the tax credit and we don't take it to its logical conclusion 20 years from now or 26 years from now, and we stop at giving the credit for the median property of $250,000, full credit, what you'll have is people that own a property at a low interest rate, and now they're not paying a property tax. There's no incentive to cycle through the real estate market. This is not a realtor thing where I'm talking about, benefiting from sales. This is a turn of real estate in an economy. A healthy economy includes a healthy real estate market. We will completely stifle the entry level and the mid-level real estate. There won't be any inventory. People aren't selling now because of a low rate that they hold. They're certainly not going to sell in the future. If you layer on, they don't have to pay a property tax, but if they move up, they do.
But
that's a real concern.
But a lot of times, I mean, is that really going to stall the market? Because with a property tax, I mean, you might be talking about going up a couple $1,000s a year, and usually when people buy a new house, that gets folded into their mortgage anyway. And I don't want to dismiss it, but I mean, I guess I'm struggling to see that as a real deterrent to the real estate market.
It's not a deterrent if we keep doing this every 2 years. If that credit grows and we keep doing it and we say we can continuously afford this, it's not a deterrent. But at some point, I fear a legislature is going to say, we've capped out. We're not going to provide a $10,000 property tax credit because the people at the high end, quote, don't need it. And when that happens, if and when that happens, now you stifle the real estate market too. I think that's an unintended consequence. Very few of us are discussing. I would prefer to see a buyout across the board. When we started this, the premise was I'm open to ideas. My bill started with a $787 million fiscal note because the 60 mil was a buyout of all 60 mils of all property types in North Dakota. I was told by people that are supporting some other legislation, that's too expensive. And you can, I mean, you're coming into the session with an $800 million bill. That's expensive. So I pulled it back to residential property. I'd be open to doing 30 mils on all property because right now under the plans that we have, ag is not getting tax relief. Commercial is not getting tax relief. So if the concern is the price tag, maybe we can get an amendment on my bill in committee to bring the 60 down to 30 and apply it to everybody. And then I would be committed, if I got reelected and came back, to do the last 30 next session.
Scott, can you talk a little bit more about that ag line? Because that is one of my concerns with both your bill and the Armstrong bill right now, that so often when you're talking, I mean, during the Measure 4 campaign, some of the biggest folks that were frustrated about property taxes were people who owned ag land. You hear stories about rural school districts where they need a new school, but they can't get it passed because there's 8 people that pay pretty much all the property taxes. Then you hear these two bills that won't really do much for ag property. I mean, can you talk a little bit? I mean, why would a farmer with a bunch of ag land support either your bill or the Armstrong bill? Because the folks in Bismarck are getting the relief, not the people out on the farm.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why the original bill that I had at 787 and 60 mils applied to everybody. And continuously, now I'm on version 6, by the way. So the bill that was presented to the committee is version 6. Version 7, if amended to reflect what you just said, if it was 60 mils, it'd be 787 million. If it were 30 mils, it'd be half of that. The cost of the other bill that we're talking about is over $600 million. So now I come into session and I'm thinking, how come I was told that 787 or even 300 million is too much? But now we're looking at 600 million anyway. So to me, the opportunity to buy out, not buy down, but buy out those 60 mils resolves the constitutional question some have of the state providing a free education. 60 mils are what we mandate, paid across the board. But you're right, there are districts. I learned there was one district where 93% of the school budget is paid by ag, and we're not providing any relief. So I said, okay, I'm open to that idea. If that's what it's going to take in the collective in this assembly to get that relief, then let's do it. I wanted to vet this publicly for a year before we got into session, so we weren't scrambled and hurried, and we left ourselves pitfalls, which we did last session. The $500 primary tax credit, we said individual, not person. So if somebody had their property in a trust or a life estate, they didn't qualify. So now we come into this session, we have to fix that retroactively. I think the buyout of the mills is almost too simple. we're dealing in algebra and not pre-calculus here. So
I wanted to say something about the ag thing. I just wanted to point out one thing. If we're talking about, like, the plans are mostly dealing with residential properties, and I know Scott's kind of primary residence versus residential, but I would point out that the farmers already have tax relief on their primary residences, and what they're upset about is their ag land, which from a certain point of view, you could say is just more commercial land. That's their business. Right. And I understand, like, some of these rural districts and it gets a little complicated, but let's not forget the farmers have already had an exemption on their residences for a long time.
Yeah, Rob, you're right. And that is a reality, but you're also dealing with the pressures that are coming when we're in session and people are saying, here's what I would support and here's what I don't. And you're right to point out that the ag community right now is not supporting any of these.
Are we just going to say farmers aren't going to pay property taxes at all? Not on their residences and not on their land? Because that doesn't seem fair.
No, because we are capping. There is some benefit here when you have the caps, because the county would not be able to raise the portion of their budget that's collected in property taxes over 3%. I'm talking about the 60 mills on schools. So there's two different parts of the bill. They would be provided some protection from increases in the cap portion of the bill. There is no benefit right now in version 6 of the 60 mil buyout.
I wanted to ask you a question, because I think a very vital point that Governor Armstrong has made about all this is the degree to which the property tax relief we've done in the past is clogging up the general fund. And I think the math I did on it, it's like a quarter. It's like 24, 25, 26%. And he likened it to the non-discretionary spending problem, which he's very familiar with, having just come from serving in Washington, D.C., where it's like every budget debate starts and it's like there's a huge swath of the budget that you can't even touch. And we're kind of creating that same problem where if we touch the property tax relief we've done so far, it's going to set off a landmine, political landmine, because everybody's property taxes are going to go up. So where does I guess that's my question for you. Where does the money, Governor Armstrong's plan, the money, like he's using legacy fund revenue. So that's from, we're not spending down the principal of the legacy fund, we're sending legacy fund earnings. So it's not really a tax burden on us. Where does the money for your plan come from?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I left that open to the Appropriations Committee from the very start. Now I find myself on the Appropriations Committee. I really like Governor Armstrong's plan for the pay. I think it makes sense and it could apply to what I'm doing. So if we were to come together and, for instance, let's say in that plan, we take the paid for out of legacy. And to me, we're talking about covering education and property tax relief. That's a legacy type use that benefits everybody, or almost everybody. I much prefer the 60 mil buyout in my plan, and we put together a merge in the 3% cap. There are some details within the 3% cap model that are different from theirs to mine. And I think some very minor things could be tweaked in either bill. What I'd like to see is two bills come out of the House for the Senate to decide. And then at the end of the session, we come together in a conference committee and put everything into one bill that makes sense. I'm advocating heavily for the mill buy down. If it's 30 mills, if it's 60 mills, it's a mill buyout. I don't know where I'm going to land on this, but I'm going to make the case. I'm going to fight for it and do my best.
Representative Louser doesn't feel like this is going to be the first bill on Kelly's desk like he wanted it to be. It feels like it's going to be a full session sort of.
And I think Kelly made a little bit of a mistake calling for that. I feel like it's okay, especially,
it was never going to happen.
Well, and especially now, and I don't think it should have.
Yep.
I don't think we should rush this. I'm glad we're having a debate about it. I think Scott brings up some excellent points that hopefully get incorporated into the final bill. But, also we got to remember, we don't have that catch-all OMB bill at the end to fix mistakes either. So this is to be right the first time.
Representative Louser, can I get one more question and then you can respond to both of those things? I have heard, and it sort of surprises me, some legislators not wanting residential primary residence property tax to get to zero. They want everybody to have a little skin in the game. Have you heard that? Is that something that's of a concern?
Well, anybody that tells me that the skin in the game argument, whether it's you have to apply for the tax relief that we're giving, right off the bat, I say the skin in the game is the fact they're paying property taxes anyway. Everybody's got skin in the game. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So to make the case for an idea relevant on someone has skin in the game, my premise is the skin in the game is they have the property they're paying taxes on in the first place. So as far as the but yes, to your point, I've heard that a couple times. That's my pushback. Everyone has skin in the game already. I would like to have seen this be the bill that went to the governor's desk first. I said that publicly last summer. There are over 50 bills the Finance and Tax Committee in the House has to hear before they kick out final recommendations. Pretty hard to tell somebody no if you haven't actually put the big vehicle forward. And then the whole process starts over in the Senate. And if and when they change something, we go to conference. The theory being get to the governor's desk early before crossover so we know what the tax relief is and we spend whatever's in the budget on other things, as opposed to overspending on other things, getting to the end of session and saying, sorry, we can't afford the tax relief that we were working towards. So my hope to get to the governor's desk early was twofold. Number one, to recognize the urgency of what the people in North Dakota want out of this session. And secondly, to preserve the full tax relief so we don't spend it on something else. But you're right. The reality is that wasn't going to happen.
One thing, I guess the skin in the game argument, because that does, like, just as a general philosophical thing, I do think people need to feel their government, right? They need to understand there's a cost benefit relationship between themselves. And so I don't like, the skin in the game thing goes away. As long as we get a good cap in place, I'm less worried about the skin in the game. But that's probably, I mean, and to me, that's the thing I'm really worried about. We saw some big pushback. Our hometown, Minot, Scott, kind of came out swinging against caps. We saw out of Fargo, people in Grand Forks seem fine with it. So, and there's all sorts of points of view. But I mean, are you, I'm very worried that if we do all this, we do a big, whether we're buying down mills or we're doing Armstrong's plan, if it's not coupled with a cap, we haven't fixed squat. That's what I'm worried about.
Well, yeah, we've done buy downs before, and again, I'm using a distinction between buy down and buy out. We've done the buy downs before, but we haven't capped. We've attempted some other ideas without giving that relief. These two parts have to go together. We have to have the cap and we have to have the relief at the same time. What that looks like, I think I see a clear path, but I might be in the minority here. I'm just gonna keep fighting for what I see is and what I believe is right after talking for 14 months about this all over the state. We can't just do one or the other. It has to be both. You're right.
Yeah, and I think it's always been, what does the cap look like? And then what does the relief look like? I mean, that's always been, from my perspective, going into the set. Those are the two variables. What does the cap look like? And how do you provide that immediate relief so people feel it right away? So do you think this is going to be last week of the session sort of thing in a conference committee? People fighting through the details of this thing?
Yeah, I do. I hope I'm on the conference committee if it ends up, that I would be in a position to be on the conference committee. I think it's going to go to the last week. We are 2 days behind, by the way. We're on, I think, day 17. We're already 2 days behind. Yesterday, we didn't get through the day before's 11th order on the floor. So what that means is we're having long floor debates. We're going to be going in late next week. I think every day next week on the House side, we're going to be debating bills. Yeah, I think it's going to go to the end. And I'll give you an idea where I think everybody could come together and say 3% is not the right number for the cap. Maybe we say it is 3% or consumer price index plus 1 point, whichever's higher, or whichever's lower. An idea like that could come out now or 2 months from now and become part of the conference committee. And then we find that maybe we do pick 3%, but that didn't work. So we come back in 2 years and the 3 becomes 3.75. This is going to be a moving target, and there are a lot of ideas. And a lot of them can work together, and we are going to take until the last week as I see this progressing.
Scott, one last comment. The bills have to be out of the policy committees a week from Monday, correct? So will all of these bills have to be out of finance and tax and on their way to appropriations by, 8 days from now, 10 days from now?
Yeah, I think if I remember right, the deadline for policy bills out of committee that have a threshold of appropriation is February 12th.
Okay.
Because we're dealing with all those agency budgets right now. And then, for instance, DPI for schools, if there are budget or if there are policy bills that have money, we have to put that into the budget and get that out to the floor of that, well, to full appropriations, then to the floor of the House before crossover. So that's why we have those hard deadlines progressively. I think it's February 12th for policy bills with money. Otherwise,
so we'll see some votes in committee very, very soon on these property tax bills.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Finance and Tax Committee in the House starts kicking out these bills by, it won't be next week. I'm not even sure they're done hearing all the tax bills. They're going to have to start kicking them out the following week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So yeah, you're right, 8 to 10 days.
Well, we got to end the interview there, but I, for one, am glad that we're taking time out of this process to debate like 10 commandments, putting the 10 commandments in every classroom and declaring Christ as king and all these other things. Super, super great use of our time. I'm sure the taxpayers appreciate it. Scott.
Well, Rob, let me point something out though. And I think you'd appreciate this. Every bill that we hear matters to somebody. And yeah, it takes some time, but that's going to be on us to stay late to deal with. It doesn't cost the taxpayers any more time. It's just a lot of frustration. But the fact is that bill probably mattered to somebody, and that's North Dakota.
Fair enough. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
You'd expect to see the North Dakota oil and natural gas industry working at wells and processing facilities. What you might not know is our oil and gas industry also works to build roads, provide school funding, and even protect us from flooding by creating nearly 50,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, our great outdoors, and our schools. North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, advancing the possibilities.
Welcome to the second part of Plain Talk, where we're going to talk about more property taxes, because that's super exciting for you. Although this stuff matters so stinking much. How we go about doing this. We just had Representative Scott Louser talking about his take on the approach. I think he makes some very good points that need to be considered and perhaps incorporated in the final bill. But this debate matters so much. This is so consequential, Chad, how this plays out.
No, it's super important. I think that, again, a message was sent through Measure 4. I'm very happy that it's very clear the governor and the legislature is going to do something substantial. I think we're now at the point where, what does that substantial look like? We've always known there's going to be some sort of relief. There's going to be some sort of reform. And what does that look like? I think that reform is going to be caps. So then the next question is, what do those caps look like? And this is what the process is supposed to be. Nobody's going to get everything they want, but hopefully at the end of the day, the property taxpayers are taken care of.
Our next guest is kind of standing, at least in one of the chambers, is kind of standing astride this process. It's Senator Mark Weber. He's a Republican from Casselton. He is the chairman of the Finance and Taxation Committee, which kind of means that you're like a plumber, Senator Weber, who's got to move this crap along the pipes.
I tell you, it's like herding cattle and trying to bring everybody together. Yes, and so we've got a big job ahead of it, but we're starting to engage now in this big debate.
I think we wanted to talk to you a little bit about process, because there are a lot of property tax proposals. I know you're in the Senate, but eventually the ones that make it through the House are going to end up on your side as well. What's it like? I mean, what in your mind, what is the process like winnowing these things down to get it to something that can be debated? Because, trying to wrap your mind around the dozens and dozens of proposals, that's tough. But every bill that gets put in has to go through the process and get a hearing and get a vote and all that stuff. So Just describe us. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, I'll tell you, thank you for that question. You know, there are endless proposals, and everybody has an idea how we do it. We all have our own biases as to where we want to go. All of these proposals, we need to score them, you know, from a budget standpoint, and of course, we're trying to do that as we speak. You know, I think when we started on this whole discussion several months ago, you know, the basic question is, who are we trying to help? Are we trying to focus in on anybody in particular? Do we provide relief across the board? I think at the beginning of this debate, we all agree that homeowners in particular are asking for the relief. And so there are proposals that are addressing that. There are some other proposals that maybe want to take a little broader view and address various property classes, but we're only at the beginning of this. And again, I would say now that the House is dealing with the main bill that was, you know, advocated by the governor, and we're looking at some proposals in the Senate. But I think once we hit crossover, I think the goal is for each chamber to put out a proposal so that after crossover, they can each be debated in earnest.
Senator Weber, I mean, obviously you're an ag guy. You come from an ag background. You know, one of the things in the primary proposals on the House side is not a lot of focus on ag land. And often, I mean, we just talked with Representative Louser. He brought up a school district who 87% of their property taxes are paid for by ag land. How are you going to make sure that farmers and ranchers in the state feel like they're getting something out of this property tax reform? Because it seems like right now you can make the case that the caps help and those kind of things, but not instant relief for owning that ag land. What are you hearing from farmers and ranchers? What are you thinking on that subject?
Well, again, when the debate started a month ago or 2 months ago, you know, the focus of the debate was primarily on homeowners. And of course, agriculture now is starting to weigh in. You know, agriculture is a $32 billion industry. It's a big deal here across the state of North Dakota. So the ag industry is starting to weigh in. One of the problems we face, you know, there's talk about mill buy downs. You know, one of the problems is, you know, when we're talking about mills, the value of a mill varies depending on what political the sub that you might live in. And the other thing too, if we do something across the board with straight mills, there are going to be winners and there's going to be some bigger winners. You know, I think our sympathies are we want to start with try to help those homeowners that are living on modest incomes. You know, probably, you know, more of the aging population, if you will. I think, again, at the beginning, that's who we're trying to focus on. But certainly now the ag folks are, and I'm an ag guy. Everybody knows that. I'm an ag guy. And certainly that discussion is starting to heat up.
So how do we, in terms of, I guess, let me ask, I mean, do you have a preference out of all this? And again, you're kind of in a position as a chairman of a policy committee that's central to this debate. You know, you also have a responsibility to facilitate the process. But I mean, as a senator from Casselton representing a lot of rural area, I mean, do you have a preference between these plans? Do you like the governor's plan?
One of the things with the governor's plan, I don't support, you know, taking residential down to zero. The governor, his proposal is very well intended, and it puts it on a glide path, you know, to take residential potentially down to zero for the majority of the homes when we get out 10 years into the future. I don't think that I go there. There's some problems with that. I think at the end of the day, everybody should pay a little property tax, just like I've always said, everybody should pay a little income tax. Everybody should pay a little sales tax. So one of the problems I have, if we put it on a glide path where residential is going to get down to zero, where I live, and when we've had some bond issue votes, if you will, it's no secret that you know, the farm property is paying the bulk of the bill, particularly in school bond issues. And I think if you get residential eventually down to zero in the future, when we have these bond issue votes, you're going to have once again You're going to have our city friends more than likely to vote yes in some of these rural areas, and then the farmland more than likely to vote no. And that problem has been around for years, and I think that problem would only get worse if we eventually get residential down to zero. So again, don't get me wrong. We want to focus, we're trying to help residential, but it's got to be kind of a balance.
Is what's informing that position kind of, because I mean what we have it is there's more people who live in cities and own residential property in cities than own farmland. So is what's informing your argument where everybody's got to have some skin in the game? Is it kind of you're afraid that the people who own farm property are just going to be outnumbered, and so they're gonna, the people who aren't paying the tax are gonna basically vote to raise the tax that's paid for by people who are?
Well, when I look at some of the particular very, very rural districts where you don't really have a large city or you have smaller towns, it is very clear that ag property is paying a significant share of the bill, of 50%, some cases maybe even 60% of the total education costs in that particular school district. So it is a challenge for some of our extreme rural areas there. And so we need to take that into account as well.
Senator Weber, I mean, obviously, these are all these proposals cost a lot of money. I mean, I think they're varying degrees, and I shouldn't say cost a lot of money. It's reform. It's money that the state won't be, the state will be sending back to the political subs. Have you gotten any direction from leadership as you're looking at these bills? And again, we understand that the primary bills are on the House side. Do you give any sense, like, how much money we're talking about here? I think the governor's bill was $600 or $700. Is that sort of where you expect this to land, or do you think the price tag will come down?
Well, I think, the more sectors we try to help, you've got residential, you've got farmland, you've got commercial, you've got centrally assessed. The more that we try to help, obviously the price tag goes up. And we know that at the end of the day, we've got to have meaningful relief. It's got to be sustainable over the long run. And so that's why, too, we have to be careful how much we can spend now up front. And if we ever get into trouble with oil, or the economy goes in a tank, if we ever get into trouble in the future, then we have even a bigger problem. We can't start out by doing a big bang this time, and 2 years from now we find out that we're in trouble. So we're being very careful as we score some of this. The governor has a number in mind. I think he shared that. Again, are we trying to sprinkle the support across all sectors, or are we trying to hone in on residential? And again, early on at the beginning of the debate, that's where the focus was. But again, now it does get more complicated as we try to account for agriculture, and as you account for all classes of property. Now the price tag goes up. And we don't want to get ourselves into trouble so that in 2 years from now, and like I said, if oil's in the tank, the economy's in the tank, then we have even bigger problems.
One thing, the governor, obviously, he asked that a property tax bill be the first thing sent to his desk. I think we all agree that's, given the depth of this debate, and it's hard. Like, it's not a complaint. This is a complicated debate. I just don't think that's going to happen. But Representative Louser, who we just spoke to, made a really good point where this debate really impacts a lot of the other debates, in that, we're talking about a lot of appropriation, a lot of revenue being thrown around. How do decisions get made on other proposals? For instance, paying for school lunches, or maybe doing some of the other the ESA bill, or what have you, with schools and paying for some of that. This impacts those debates, right? So how do you, from a process standpoint, how do you balance those so that how much you have to spend on those other bills? You don't get yourself in trouble where you've committed yourself to big property tax relief, and now you don't have enough money to do some of these other things.
Absolutely. And that is one of the big debates right now, to help the Appropriations Committee, if we could all agree on what that dollar should be, amount for any tax relief proposal, to then let the Appropriations Committee set those dollars aside. So knowing, okay, is the price going to be $500 million, $600 million, $700 million, whatever the figure is, and then they can budget accordingly to take care of some of these other big asks that will be coming to the legislature. You know, there will only be so much to go around, and we are hopeful that we could get that total dollar amount figured right now and set it in stone and agree to that, and then we can budget more accordingly for some of these other programs that'll be coming forward.
Senator Weber, this is your first session as chairman of the Senate Finance and Tax Committee. Are you feeling a little learning by fire hose here? I mean, you want to talk about the committee that's going to have the most juice and involved in the biggest issue. It's going to be yours.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was, we had a little discussion who was going to be chairman, and so we flipped the coin, and I guess I lost the coin toss. So there we go. But yes, it most certainly has been a learning curve. And, you know, this is the challenge, too, for all of us to get our arms wrapped around all of this. You know, the information, there is so much information. And, when we tie in, what's needed for education, my goodness, that's a complicated formula right there. But the finance and tax, we've got to have a little understanding of how that works. We've got to have a little understanding about the legacy fund, the monies that are coming into the legacy fund. And so, yeah, it's a lot of information, and I'm one to admit I too am on a learning curve as we progress. This is only my third session, and I too am on a learning curve.
That's going to be the norm going forward as as term limits sets in. There's going to be a lot of people in that position where they're on their second, third term, and now they're in leadership positions, committee chairs, maybe caucus leads, things like that, where, the learning curve is going to be short. What is good from your perspective? And again, I think this is really, we hear a lot from lawmakers who represent, we're jokingly using the term urban. I don't know that there's any urban areas in North Dakota, but you know what I mean. More city-centric districts. We hear a lot from them about property tax relief. Your perspective is very interesting because you are pretty close. Your district is pretty close to one of the largest communities in our state, Fargo, but very rural. I think your perspective, what does a good plan look like to you? I mean,
well, I think one of the key components, and perhaps we're even going to have more difficulty figuring that out, is that I think in order to provide sustainable and meaningful relief, we've got to have reform. And I would say caps are going to be a part of whatever we end up with at the end of the day. Now, I recognize that caps, one size does not fit all. We have high growth cities. We have cities that are on the decline. So one size is not going to fit all, but I am convinced if we don't include caps, we will fail in the long run, as evidenced by in the past. The legislature has given, I think, $1.7 billion in property tax relief. They took the 110 mills from education, took it down to 60. We took care of social services, put it under the state budget, and yet our property taxes continue to rise. So I would say this: to get this done, we must have caps, and if we don't, we will fail. Now, I think there's more to talk about in caps. As I get to that, remember this: we have a total budget of, I think, over some $19 billion, and of that $19 billion, I think over $5 billion of that is already sent back to the political subs from us. So maybe a 3% cap, maybe that isn't even enough. Maybe it should be a 2% cap. There's going to be a lot of debate on that, and I would go a step further. I've actually got a bill that I have introduced. It has not been put on the hearing schedule yet. I have a bill that would cap the overall budget increase from year to year according to the CPI, Consumer Price Index, as you will. Now, the people say, well, wow, that's quite a bit. Well, for lack of a better term, I'll call, when we're talking about a 3% cap on property tax, I'm going to call that cap light, if you will. Capping the overall budget. Let's look at a large city. I think now we can see the data that our larger cities only rely on about 20% of their revenues coming from the property tax. So there are other sources of revenue, our user fees such as sewer and water, the federal grants that might come in, lodging and restaurant taxes, special assessments like that. And so when some of these federal grants come in, is usually a required local match comes with that deal, with that part of the deal. So if we just do caps on property, it is very easy then to shift to other revenue. You know, you could raise the user fees, raise the local sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the time has come that we must have that discussion, and I think that discussion. We need to have that discussion. I support that. One of the things in my bill would still allow those political subs to go above the budget cap, but it would have to be brought to a vote of the people. And in my bill, the bill says that vote would take place at the general election, and two-thirds would have to approve it in order to go above the budget cap. And again, I have suggested it be pegged to the consumer price index. You know, we can certainly debate that. I don't know if that's right or not, but I think it's a good start. But we have to work together with our political subs to bring this all in line. And like I said before, we can provide the relief, but if we do not do a good job with our caps, we will have failed over the long run. And that's what I think we're all concerned about. We need to get this job done. I'm so grateful for the governor's leadership, but we know full well too, at the end of the day, if we don't get it done, old measure number 4 is going to be back on the ballot. So we have a job to do, and I think at the end of the day, we will have some good relief and some meaningful reform.
Senator Weber, on your bill that would cap local political subs at CPI, would that include school districts? As you know, school districts can't raise fees. They don't have sales tax. They're really limited in all the ways that they can raise revenue compared to cities and counties and parks. Have you thought about if schools would be part of that as well?
You know, Chad, I've just got it introduced. There's a lot there to look at, and I'm not sure if I could even answer that right now, but a good, fair question, and most certainly that would be part of the discussion. And I think we all too would have a lot to learn, and how it would affect all the political subs if a scenario like this were to pass. So yes, I'm looking forward to that debate, and I certainly don't have all the nitty-gritty of it, if you will.
Senator, so as the chair of Senate and Finance and Tax, you're coming upon a deadline where you got to get your bills out. I think it's week after next to appropriations. I think it's the 10th or the 12th or the 13th. Are you feeling pretty good about where your policy committee's at and where other policy committees at are in terms of moving this process along? Because now it feels like, people don't really pay attention to this deadline, but often it's a big deadline for policy committees to get this stuff out. Are you feeling okay about that the work's going to get done in time?
No doubt we will get it done. I think it's February 10th. We got to have it out so that it can get into the hands of the Appropriations Committee before it comes back to the full Senate floor. So right now in committee, I believe we've got 3 or 4 proposals addressing this. And I think it's 3 or 4, maybe it's 5, I can't remember. And we've had hearings. Let's see, have we heard them all? I think we've heard them all. We have one left to hear. And I think then we will look at all of that, and then before crossover, we will have that whittled down to one good proposal. I'm not sure how that's going to look yet, but we'll get that done. And then, of course, the House will send their proposal over to us, and then the fun will begin, I guess, after crossover.
I always feel like the Senate has an easier time in the first half because you guys just have fewer bills because you have half the members. But then in the second half, the House dumps, and granted, they've winnowed theirs down, but they have twice the number of members. So then they dump all their bills on you and say, here's what we passed, sort them out.
Well, here's the deal. In our Finance and Tax, we only had 21 bills. The House Finance and Tax Committee had 55 to deal with. So look at that. So, you
ever call over to the House side and say, hey, don't send us all those?
Oh, I tell my good friend Craig Hedlund, who chairs Finance and Tax, Craig, kill about 90% of them, send us a handful, and we'll go from there. And so, yeah, the second half, that's going to get a lot crazier.
I watch quite a bit of the House floor deliberations, and I swear they don't kill any bills over there. For a bunch of people who claim that they're, red on everything, they pass everything. Your second half's going to be a tough one, Senator.
Well, like I said, in this debate, what's the old saying? You ain't seen nothing yet. So we'll have our hands full.
That last question, a little bit off topic. Did you ever feel like committees should have a little more power to maybe kill some of these bills and not send them to the floor? Does every bill need a floor vote?
Well, I think sometimes that does, in fact, delay the process. One of the concerns I have, I think we are introducing entirely too many bills in the legislature. I think I've got 4 bills that I've introduced last session. I think I had 3. I have all I can do to properly manage those bills through the legislative process. Now, there's some 900 to close to 1,000 bills that we are, if we could discipline ourselves, or if legislative management, we could put the hammer down and say, hey, we each introduced 3 or 4, that ought to be enough. I think if we had less bills, we would all have a better understanding of the bills. We would all understand them better. And I think we've just gone too far with so many bills. Often what happens, we might have 10 bills on the same subject, hoping one of them passes. I think that's ridiculous. And I think we need to shore that up and discipline ourselves more as a legislative body to have less bills. We could have more meaningful debate. We could have a better understanding of some of those bills that we're currently addressing. I see that as a problem.
Amen. I mean, the other thing that comes into play, and I saw it yesterday observing some of the committee work, like some of these House members who sponsor 25, 30 bills, trying to schedule them to be at all the different hearings on bills they're prime sponsors of is a disaster. I mean, they're holding up the hearings different places. I mean, there's people over there who introduce 25 bills by themselves. It causes problems.
I can speak from my own experience. Like I said, I think I've got 4 bills this time. I think I had 3 last time. Anybody can introduce a bill, but to guide that bill through, to get the votes that you are needed, to get it through committee, to get it through, that's a much bigger job. And I feel the bills, that's why for myself, 3 or 4 is all that I can handle, because it's more than just throwing the bill in the pipeline. The real work then has to get the votes to pass your bill if you're to do the right thing. So I'm speaking from my own experience.
Also, if somebody else has a bill that primarily does what your bill does, maybe just work with them and see if that, through the debate and the process on that bill, see if it can be amended to incorporate the things you want.
And one of the things, Rob, the challenge with that is legislative council is the group that's in charge of drafting the bills, and the policy is they cannot reveal to any other legislator a bill that they might be drafting. So me and my next door seatmate, we might be introducing a bill on the same subject, but by legislative council, by the rules, are bound that they cannot tell. They can't say, well, Senator Weber, did you know Senator Rummel is doing this? They cannot do that. And if we could somehow address that, because oftentimes we may not know what our seatmates are introducing, and and I think if we could do something there, that would help alleviate that problem.
I feel like we could have like a clearinghouse somewhere where people could look in and see, okay, what's been proposed on property taxes? Do I like what I see, or do I feel like I need to put in something original? Anyway, that's a whole other podcast. We're not going to discuss that on this podcast because we're out of time. Senator Weber, thank you for your time coming on today.
Thanks, Senator.
Great discussion, and thank you for having me.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Well, just finished up with a very again, this is such a worthwhile debate, and I don't know that we need 50 property tax bills, but I am glad that we're getting some different approaches on this, because there are different perspectives. If you own a bunch of ag land, you're going to have one perspective. If you own just a single family house in a community like Minot or Fargo or Bismarck or something, you're going to have a different perspective. So I am glad. I thought that discussion at the end we got to do some stuff about the bills. I mean, even I mean, I think the bill count as of last night was like 1,000. We're closing in 2009 was like 1,060 something. That was the most in the last 20 years. And we're closing in on breaking that record. And again, if they were all substantive bills that really address needs, then fine. But I mean, there was a bill last night to declare Jesus Christ as king.
To be clear, it's a resolution. I don't think it's going to be in code, declaring him king. But yeah,
I find it objectionable even as a resolution, frankly.
Amen, Brother Rob. Amen.
But I just, why do we need to spend time on this?
Yeah. Going back to property taxes, I thought those two discussions back to back were super interesting because I think you do have Representative Louser in Minot, living in town. He's a school board member, right? He's a real estate agent. He has an interesting perspective on this. And then you have Weber, who's a farmer and a rancher and, is sort of close with the different ag groups. And, both of them wanting to get something done, wanting to do it right. I kind of like the legislature sort of flexing their muscles a little bit here and saying, hey, we like Kelly's plan, but there's some things that we want to look at deep. That's the purpose of the legislative branch. And it was probably naive for us to hope that the 50 different ideas would get down to one bill and move fast. But here we are. I think they're doing good work and there's good conversations taking place. And I hope legislators don't dig their heels in and say, hey, this is my idea. This is the only idea worth pursuing. Something needs to get done. And the same with the governor's office, right? I mean, I hope Governor Armstrong knows that his plan isn't perfect and that there might need to be some tweaks.
Well, we can't come to the end of the session and have done nothing because a bunch of big egos or do something that we're going to rubber stamp as property tax relief like we have in past sessions that doesn't accomplish anything other than clogging up state budgets more. I mean, there's got to be two. We've got to deliver relief to property owners. And I think residential property owners got to be at the top of that list. We got to deliver relief to them and we got to cap local spending. Those are the two things. How we
get and there's very few variables, right? I mean, what do the caps look like? And is the relief through buying down mills or is it through the primary residence tax credit or some form of that? I think those are the options that are out there. I mean, there's a lot of more complicated formula change sort of stuff. I don't think those things are going to get legs. I think it's going to end up being something simple. Either mills get bought down or bought out, or there's a primary tax credit that's given to every primary resident at some level.
What do you prefer? I mean, obviously you're coming from a education perspective, where schools end up in this. Where are you at credit versus mills?
I prefer the mill buy down, and I worry about ag land, and I appreciate your point that the residents they don't pay, but during Measure 4 and what I hear from small school districts, it's a handful of farmers who pay the majority of these property tax increases in school districts. I don't want to set up a fight. I don't want to set up a situation where it's still urban versus rural and there's still this large group. I want to make sure everybody gets something. And Weber was clearly trying to say, homeowners are the people we need to take care of. But I think in order to move us forward, I want to make sure everybody gets something. So I'd prefer the mills, but I'll take either one.
I think you're right to point out that risk because the ag constituency can be an easy one to steamroll because they don't have the numbers. They don't have the numbers. Probably the most powerful voice is in the legislature but even there, I mean, there's just more people who live in cities in North Dakota and don't.
And when you talk about bonds and building buildings, if Scott Louser said 87% of one school district's property tax is funded by ag land. So you're trying to build a school and you're putting a bond on, you're never going to pass that thing. Or you're going to pass it and two guys are going to pay for all of it.
Right. Well, that's the problem. And that is something the skin in the game argument, that's it in a nutshell. You don't want majorities who are decoupled from the expense of their choices at the ballot being able to shout out the minority who has to pay for it. Like that's a situation that is it's fundamentally unjust, and we have to avoid that. Even if it's possible to do politically, because again, they don't have the numbers. We can't let that happen. So I think you're right. That's something that wasn't on my radar at the beginning of this legislative session that I've come to appreciate.
The other thing that I'm a little concerned about, because there are these options, and we talk primarily about 3, but I think there's 5 big ones and then a bunch of little ones, right? I worry legislative processes do lead to, I'll take a little from over here, a little from over here, a little from over here, and you end up with not a very good bill. You don't end up with a good policy because you're just trying to, it's part of the compromise process, but do you end up trying to get votes and add in some bad policy to get this good policy? I just want to make sure that it's a pretty clean bill that the people understand. And at the end of the day, when I get my property tax bill, that number at the end, which is the only one people care about, they don't care how you get it, is smaller now than it was in the past, and substantially smaller.
Yeah, I agree. About the bill count thing. I mean, I think Senator Weber, I mean, his quote was, no, I can't read my own handwriting. But basically, he feels the legislature's introducing too many bills.
Yeah. My favorite joke that I've heard is Representative Ista and Koppelman have introduced a total of 30 bills, and Ista introduced 1.
Yeah. I would do 2 things on that. I would allow, at the beginning when they're kind of referring bills to committee and stuff, I would allow a motion to just call a vote on the bill right away before it even goes to committee. And just I don't know, maybe set a super majority, but if you can get like 2/3 of the chamber to just say to a bill, because there's some bills like that, maybe we could weed it out. And then the other, let committees table bills. Just let them table them. Like, maybe this doesn't have to go, like we're not getting anywhere. This is dumb. They take a vote on a recommendation anyway. Maybe make that vote count. Or maybe if it's like maybe like a super majority of the committee or something. I'm open to how to design this, but let them just table the bill. Like, no, it's just not a good idea. None of us on the committee think it's a good idea. It goes away. And it doesn't even come back to the floor. And let's just save some, because that's what Representative Louser is saying. They're behind 2 days. Why? They're having long floor debates.
So
maybe some of these bills just don't have to go to the floor.
Yeah, so one, on the committees, I love the idea of a committee being able to kill a bill or table a bill. I mean, that's how most states do it, right? And those are the people who died the deepest into the policy. You should trust those folks to be able to kill it. But yesterday I watched the House floor, and I can't remember what the issue was, but they debated something for over 30 minutes that got 10 votes. 30 minutes on something that got 10 votes.
In that bill, I think if you can make a motion at the beginning, I mean, just right off the bat, and just say, I move that this bill, we call a vote right now.
And they are now doing much more a consent calendar. Like, if a bill and I've never seen that before this session, if a bill comes through committee and it's 14-0 do pass, if it's something not controversial, they'll just do consent calendar. And I don't know how many people are doing that, but it's being done a little bit this session that I have on the House side that I haven't seen in the past.
Makes me feel a little leery, because if they're doing that, they're not diving into the bills then.
No, the committee does the work, right? The committee does all the work. And then when it goes to the floor with a 14-0 do pass or do not pass, it's on the consent calendar. So they don't have that floor debate like you were talking about, because it's
I guess that's helpful.
But I was following a bill that was, it changed the teacher licensure requirement from 30 years down to 20 years. It's something we supported. That got a 14-0 do pass out of committee. And the chairman said, I don't want to put this on the consent calendar because this is a pretty substantial change and we should talk about it. So they're not abusing the consent calendar, but if there are things that are just like cleanup language or whatever.
I guess that makes sense. I like that they have that in the toolbox. But I mean, again, some of these things, they're so nonsensical. And at some point, the lawmakers have, because let's look at this from the public's perspective, right? What's getting a lot of headlines? Well, some of these crazy bills that get introduced, it happens every session. And the thing is, a lot of them end up just getting killed anyway. I feel like you could take some of the wind out of the sails, and I'll defend the media. You have to write about those bills. I mean, they're real proposals. They could pass. Some of them do pass. But I feel like we could just suck some of the oxygen, take some of the wind out of their sails if the committee can just spike it.
Yeah, I also think looking at the resolutions, and is there something we can do different on resolutions? I mean, again, you referenced the Nico Rios Christ is King resolution.
By the way, I'm working on getting him on the podcast.
He
We'll
doesn't even know who you are. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about.
well, he
Yeah.
typed for 5 minutes before he sent me that text message.
Okay. But I do think, I mean, those resolutions also have to have a hearing and come to the floor for a vote. I mean, is there something, and they mean nothing. It's a message. I mean, I understand a resolution congratulating NDSU on being national champs. That's what the state should do. But the amount of, I mean, Tveit brought back his resolution to send to the Supreme Court saying same-sex marriage should be illegal. That's a waste of time.
There's a resolution on buying Greenland,
Yeah.
which the state of North Dakota has nothing to do with that.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah, so is there a way to control that?
I mean, even the resolutions congratulating sports teams and stuff. Does anybody really care? I mean, again, if we're going to constrain the legislature to 80 days, and we set up and it's just it's a sprint to the end because we have some really consequential issues. It'd be one thing if they had a lot of spare time, but they don't. They don't.
Right.
So maybe
And is there-
congratulating the Class B team or whatever. I mean, it's nice and everything, but you know,
Well, you can also do that just a speech to the floor, and that's what often happens. Like the local senator will stand up and say, thank you or congratulations to Minot for winning the state. Yeah, I mean that takes 5 minutes versus going through a hearing and all this other stuff.
yeah, just let them rise to make some special remarks or something. Isn't that what they do? I guess I don't know how Congress, like every year when the Bison win a championship, I get the press releases that they give a speech. I mean, do they just give a speech? I imagine they're not holding committee hearings.
They usually they usually just put it in the record, or they'll pass the resolution through consent or
Just
something
let them
like
do it
that.
at the end of a floor session if they want to stand up and read something into the record. And let
Or
people-
we could do like Congress and just have them come in the middle of the night and give a speech themselves into the record when there's nobody really there, but C-SPAN is.
I feel like we could do it like at the end of a floor session. They could stand up and people who don't care can leave.
Yeah.
and
No,
just-
I kind of like the idea of a state senator at 11:30 at night sitting in the floor giving a speech to the C-SPAN camera.
Usually if I'm watching the legislative feed at 11 o'clock at night, we're like at the end of the session.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
but it sounds like next week we're gonna have evenings every week on the House side. They got to get through some bills.
Got to get caught up, but there's something that's got to change. And Senator Weber's point, I hadn't thought about that. Legislative counsel can't let other.
I didn't know that.
Has something to do with like attorney-client type thing because they are lawyers.
But the other thing is just shut down debate. Like, again, this bill yesterday, I don't even remember what it was, 30 minutes and only 10 people supported it. There was nobody changing their mind to get that. No, I would have to go back and look, but it was, oh, yeah, I do. It had to do with the National Guard being sent to be deployed if Congress didn't declare war.
Declaration one. Yeah. Right.
So you had Hendricks stand up, you had Johnston stand up, you had all these guys stand up and, make their case about why Congress should declare war. Great. I mean, you can have that conversation. Nothing to do with what we're talking about here.
And again, I don't want to rob. I mean, even if you and I don't like the bill, they're elected. They're allowed to put the bills in. I don't want to. But there's got to be a process where just these no-shot bills, like if you just throw something in the hopper and you haven't built a consensus and there's not a lot of animating force behind it, then we need to move those through quickly. And I'm sorry, next time, if you really want it, then build a coalition. Get some people on your team to back it. But we have too many of these things. By the way, I do think there's a political dynamic to some of these, like the Christmas King bill. You know what they're going to do with that? They're going to put it, it's going to come to a vote. And then the people who vote against it come next primary season. They're going to have primary people running against them. And I guarantee you we're going to see flyers calling them anti-Christian because they voted against that resolution. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, no, but I think Senator Weber also said something that I agree with wholeheartedly. If you're going to be a good legislator, you can't properly build coalition around 30 bills, right? And so when I've seen good legislators, they put in their 3 or 4 or 5 bills that they're passionate about, and they don't just put it in and then offer testimony and then walk away. They work to build consensus. I mean, I don't want to say they're lobbying, but there's a reason why they're up there.
And they're allowed to lobby for their bills.
Yeah,
They're
so
allowed to work
and they're
hallway,
working.
organize constituents to come in or other
Right.
stakeholders to come in and testify. I mean, It's a
If you're going to put your name as a prime sponsor on a bill, you should care enough about it to sort of work through that process and see it through. I guarantee some of these folks who put 25 or 30 bills in right now, Rob, if you'd call them and say, "Hey, where are these 25 bills at?" They have no idea where they're at in the process.
they might know when the committee hearing is, and that's about
Yep.
that's
But
about
do
it.
they know if the committee's done work on it? Do they know, like, they won't know. Whereas if you'd call legislators who put in a handful of bills and said, "Hey, where's 2288 at?" They'll say they did committee work yesterday. Here's the whip count in my head. That's the kind of work. Again, it's the show horse versus the workhorse.
We could
Difference in
separate some of the
legislators.
chaff from the wheat, and we don't need some of these litmus test bills. We don't need some of these
Right.
grandstanding bills. Or if we're going to allow them put in, let's allow, if the majority says, or a super majority says, then just get them out.
Right.
We're going to end it there. Oh, sorry.
Hey, one last thing. I want to say kudos to Senate Democrats. I think about 60% of them voted for Doug Burgum to be the Interior Secretary, which I think is a really, really great showing. That, I mean, he got 79, 80 votes. He can hit the ground running here with bipartisan support to work in Indian country and do all the great work that I think he can do.
I think that's a good development. And listen, I know a lot of those Democrats do not agree with him on his view on energy and stuff. But the thing is,
He's qualified.
Donald Trump won the election. Doug Burgum's qualified to do the job. That's where it ends. He gets to govern. And that's how it should work. And I'm hoping we can kind of end this era where the other side has to be obstructed at all costs. No, you got to keep your powder dry and save that for people who are truly unqualified, like RFK Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard or some of these. I mean, that's who you got to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I hope that people like Doug Burgum can do, people probably don't realize this as much as they should. President Trump signed an executive order that stopped grants for like 24 hours. That was all over the press. This caused absolute chaos in every school district in this country, everywhere.
Campus, I mean, I had college students like panicked. Like I think the NDSU like due date for tuition,
Right.
I think that's right. I mean, was right around. So there were people who have grants or federally bad. They were like, is my payment going to go through? Am I going to have to leave campus? Like, how was this going to work?
This was a big deal, and this wasn't just like a partisan difference or whatever. His administration hadn't thought about how this would affect things. And I understand the goal to cause chaos. This was unnecessary chaos to a lot of people who are just trying to live their lives. So
It hurt people.
yeah, and I don't even know if they knew they were going to hurt people. That's what's concerning about it. I think it was just super incompetent. But we can't have that stuff because, I'm thinking about schools and the calls that I had on Tuesday morning or whatever, maybe it's Monday morning. I mean, we complain that districts don't spend time teaching kids. This kind of stuff is why districts can't spend time teaching kids, because they're trying to figure out, are we going to get our school nutrition money from the feds? Are we going to get our title money from the feds? How are we going to make payroll 3 weeks from now? We need to be better than what we saw this week from the administration.
Some of that means allowing these administrations to get fully staffed up. Again, you may not like some of these people, but he won the election. This is the will of the people. He should be allowed to staff his administration up. And then if you disagree with him on policy, then let's have that debate. Let's have that fight. But let's not have a bunch of empty offices sitting around.
And I feel like this administration is moving exceptionally quick in terms of their appointments and getting people through. I think, again, that the Rubio getting unanimous, Burgum, I mean, we're going to have the fights over Hegseth and some of those other folks. But if people are qualified, like Burgum, got 80% of the votes. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Hegseth is in, Nome is in. Can we just comment, by the way, Nome cosplaying as a door-kicking member of Homeland Security? For crying out loud, you're a cabinet secretary.
Your job.
No reason to be. She was on Fox News. I saw a clip, and she's dressed up in a law enforcement uniform. Lady, you are not law enforcement.
Yeah, it should be offensive to law enforcement, but I don't know that it necessarily will. Yeah, I mean, I think that the Tulsi Gabbard nomination, that might get thrown out. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his hearing was an absolute disaster. I suspect McMahon will get through relatively quickly to education. Again, I don't think she's qualified, but she's not qualified. So I think that most of them will move. I think Kennedy, Kash Patel, and Tulsi will be the three that might be sort of in limbo.
Yeah. Well, we're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, next week, we're going to try to have he has agreed to come on. I think it's just a question of his schedule, committee hearings and stuff like that. But hopefully he'll come on and discuss some of what his thinking is behind that resolution, because I'd really like to hear it. But that's coming up next week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
Amen, Brother Rob. Amen.